Summary 2. Interface Engineering. As I mentioned in previous summary, a lot of my ideas and thinking comes from popular media and more specifically gaming. I'm the type of person that doesn't linger with one game for long, so I switch from shooters to real-time strategies or turn-based strategies to point-and-click games to RPGs and even walking simulators. And this is probably what made me crystallize the idea of interface, as game rules are hidden behind the code, and to access this code and the lore, you access the game through the game interface. So in shooter games, it's like point-and-click mechanic. It's very similar to point-and-click games generally. And in RTS, you have the bird eye perspective that you control the units. So it's basically an interface that you interact with the world. It's very similar to what I'm presenting that Anima uses to interact with this reality. In AIV mechanics summary, I put interface as a layer between Anima and the vessel, which means that whatever Anima is, I put kind of like outside of physical reality, but that's going to be a completely different debate in the Anima dissection summary that is probably going to be one of the next videos. And physical reality, we all kind of have the idea what it is, even though we don't have a very firm definition really. So I use interface as a binding layer for Anima and physical vessel. It is an abstraction layer that enables Anima to perform actions in the physical reality. And a quick side note, one thing that annoys me about the interface video is I find it to be one of the best videos I did. I put actually a lot of research to find a specific examples of it, as like I mentioned Susan Berry and her development of 3D vision and understanding. And it is a bit annoying that that video has the least interest in general. I think maybe it was because I should have done Anima first, then interface later, but that doesn't really matter that much. While interface as a concept seems a bit easier to explain, it is a bit difficult to properly border it. What I mean by that is a physical vessel is something that enables or generates the interface. So one example would be if I want to do a quick calculation in my head, I would use my brain, and that's obviously a part of the interface. However, let's say the calculation is a bit too complex, so instead of doing it with my head, I decide to use a calculator and I do the calculation and I get the result. Well, that kind of becomes a problem, as at that point the calculator kind of becomes a part of my interface. You can go like, well, that's not, you're just getting a result, but in most of cases when I do calculations in my head, I don't, like, the only proper function you can do mathematically in your head is counting. So when someone asks you what is 12 times 12, you immediately go 144. You don't actually add it up because you have it stored somewhere in your memory. So you just recall it. And in case of calculator, you just used an external processing device to create result or to obtain the result. So that kind of puts a bit of a gray area where you should draw the border of the interface, as it same goes with the memory, as like you can remember a lot of stuff, but sometimes the things that you don't remember you're gonna write down in Notepad or in the phone and you remember them later. And also the way memory functions is through language. You are giving access to your memories to someone else, of course via compressed medium. So when you talk to someone, you're impairing information towards them. When you write a book, you are storing your information in an external medium that's going to be read again by some other person. So then, is book an interface? Is calculator an interface? I don't know really. It becomes a bit even murkier when you think as what interface is something that is generated from physical vessel. But if, for instance, you take a lot of people, they are all physical vessels and interfaces, of course, and together they will generate complex things like traffic, economy, and similar abstract concepts that have a real influence on us. So then can you argue that in some way the economy is, or traffic is, a part of some interface? I don't know, it becomes a bit murky, and I prefer to use the most simple examples of the interface. So that's why I focus mostly on living organisms like humans, animals, other mammals, even bugs. So when you include bugs, then it starts becoming a problem at what point the artificial intelligence will become an interface by itself. And even if it's not an interface by itself, like when I use large language models, I am getting an information back that enhances my interface in certain way. To really define it, it becomes a bit more murky, but we can pretend that we understand the main parts and then just ignore defining the borders for now. There is also a bigger problem in terms of defining memory aspect of interface, as you can argue that every action imprints a certain effect on their physical reality, and then every subsequent action, even after you're gone, after you're dead, is going to lead to a cascade of other actions. So in a way you can argue that reality itself is a vessel, because actions that we do make changes to the physical reality, and those changes manifest later through other individuals, through other people, even after we are gone. So in a way, our actions become a permanent feature in this reality as they become written in the physical reality. Now, putting all those philosophical questions aside, one exciting part of the interface is going to be its testability in near future. And I would like to label this upcoming branch of technology interface engineering. All of you that watched the interface video will probably remember the Future Labs experiment I put in the video, where you upgrade a person's visual cortex and the eye with an ability to see another primary color. And this might be possible with the future technologies. But of course that part was speculative, and I found it a bit exciting to put it in the video. Now, what will probably be possible, because we already have those kinds of experiments done on animals, is going to be memory editing. More specifically, we already have technologies that can induce memories in a lab rat, and very soon we will probably have the ability to track the locations of those memories within the brain and erase them. Now, considering these future technologies, it will be really funny if a company that produces the machines that enable you to directly edit your own memories put you in one of those machines, and then you actually change your own memories. So you erase some unpleasant or traumatic or useless information from your head, you add something useful, and then in real time you can feel the effect, because I'm not talking about you being unconscious and then waking up with a new upgraded interface. I am talking about this as you're editing your own memories in real time. And for me, this is not very difficult to imagine, because I learn new things all the time and I also forget a lot of things most of the time. And it's also going to be interesting if you are able to upgrade, for instance, your processing speed, so your intelligence, and then you realize how disgusting was your previous state. I'm starting to sound a little bit like Omni Messiah, but it is interesting to think about what possible technologies we will have in future centuries and how they will change the current meta. And what do I mean by this is, at the point we decide to abandon the crude biomass that we call bodies and switch to something more reliable, safer, and more convenient, which is probably going to be some form of cybernetics, or maybe even full conversion to something that we would label as machine today. Again, this is all highly speculative, but it is interesting to consider what will the new meta be. Where I got this idea is I watch a lot of serial kill documentaries like everyone else. So I'm always fascinated by what makes them commit the acts they do. And in a lot of cases, it is just a simple error in the brain, where the brain creates a pleasure association with doing harm to someone else or taking someone else's life. Now, if you're thinking about creating super intelligence as something that's going to be the next step in evolution, you can think, well, what would be the best interface to adjust for it in order to be dominant, to survive, to thrive in the current meta. So of course someone will go, well, can we just tune it in a way that instead of killing other artificial intelligences, it gets the same sexual pleasure that serial killers get from killing, but instead of killing, it gets it from discovering new technologies or discovering new physics or discovering new mathematics. And then you have a very direct way of pushing something to create new discoveries. Side note, originally I had an idea to make a video about Chokin, which was a genetically engineered chicken that, besides being 250 pounds of delicious white meat, is also made in a way that it receives pleasure from the idea of it being executed and served as nourishment for us. Yes, I basically invented a massive chicken with a war fetish, but it would be an interesting example of future interface engineering. And of course, I find the live interface editing a bit more interesting, as if you genetically modify an organism to have a certain structure of the vessel, that is, certain body that generates a certain interface, you will not be able to compare them directly, unlike when you do the modification of the live interface and you have stored memories of the state before that you compare to the current state. This probably cannot be applied for all modifications, since the memories of the previous state and new state wouldn't be compatible. As for instance, increase of intelligence can be very easily compared, as it's basically your brain working faster in newer mode than in a previous. But if you add some new options, and I know I mentioned before adding new primary color, but you can think about adding better understanding of some mathematical concept like multiple spatial dimensions, or how many other options can be there to attach to the interface. As for instance, we have visual processing, which is fairly complex as it involves shapes, colors, 3D vision, and etc. We have smell and taste, which are quite analogous, as sense of taste works in a very limited capacity without the sense of smell. And of course you have hearing, perception of heat, perception of pain. You have about 20 to 30 senses, I don't know exact number, that are all part of human cognitive experience. And on top of that you have memory recall, you have mathematical understanding, thinking in a certain way, processing information in a certain way. And I start questioning what other things can be added to this conceptual smorgasbord. This hints that at a certain point we will start experimenting with the endpoints of the interface in order to find out new ways to enrich it. So I'm not just talking about adding simple senses, but other ways the information is processed internally. In my mind, this whole interface and its power starts to look like a Jenga tower made from dominoes that represent our understanding of certain conceptual pieces. Now, this conceptual Jenga tower is something I will elaborate on one of the future videos, but in future there might be a need to construct the specialized interfaces just to find new conceptual pieces, as discovering them on the main interface might be unsafe for its stability. In any case, interface engineering might be the first testable piece of the high probability framework that might happen in the next couple of decades. In the meantime, thank you for our time.